Alright, here we go with the last set of video notes for the year. These ones are on succession and also biodiversity. So let's get started. Succession is defined as the gradual ordered growth of a species in an area. That's the official definition. And you guys know this already. Like, think about what your backyard looks like. If you had a nice forested backyard and you cut down all those trees, what would you expect to see there in a year? Would you expect to see trees there again? No. You'd see probably more grass. And the year after that, you would see shrubs, and then maybe you'd see saplings, things like that. Same thing if you have a nice mowed lawn, right? If you stop mowing that lawn, are you going to have trees there in a year? No. You have to work through certain stages, right? It's gradual, right? Not change overnight, and you know what to expect is coming. So, excuse me, there's two different types of succession. The first one is primary succession. So this is when you get development of a community in an area without previous life. So for example, on rocks or on sand dunes or this brand new volcanic island, right, there's really nothing there. So life has to start from scratch. Right? There's no toehold at all. The other type, as you can probably guess, is called secondary succession. And this is the one where you have a community coming up after there's some kind of disruption, right? So whether maybe you had a forest fire or a clear cut, like you have here, or there was some farming going on, or a strong storm came along and blew down 30% of the trees. All these things change the ecosystem in a drastic way. It really disrupts the ecosystem, and then new things need to grow in the spot of that disruption. Whenever we're talking about succession, we sort of think of it in stages. And each stage, generally speaking, makes the area more habitable for the next stage. But then again, it may also harm the previous stage. So if you look down here in this diagram, this is probably more like a primary succession example. Let's say all you have is exposed rocks. Can you have grasses growing on exposed rocks? No. You're going to have things that can grow on rocks, like lichens, those little like orange crusty things that grow on rocks. And after a long time, lichens might build up, and that might give an area where mosses might be able to take hold. They don't have a lot of root structure, they don't need a lot of soil, they live low to the ground, they could live there. And then after a long time of mosses and dying mosses, then you might have enough substrate, enough stuff where grasses and things like that can take hold. Again, and then so maybe these guys, right, grasses and weeds, have some flowers. These might be attracting birds who would come in, or other animals come in, depositing more seeds, and so you might start to get different things starting to grow. And then again, right here, right, more animals bringing in more seeds, increasing the soil, maybe changing the pH. All this stuff would allow the next stage to grow a little bit better, right? And these guys maybe prep the soil a little bit more, loosen it up, and allow these more mature species to take root, and yada yada yada. And again, like I said, they also may harm the previous stage, right? If you've got a young forest, these guys are going to be shading out these guys, or they're going to be taking up all the water from these guys, or these guys are going to cover up these guys, or these guys are definitely going to shade out all of these guys, right? You don't see a lot of little wildflowers growing down here in the forest because there's just not enough light for them. So every stage helps the stage next to it, and then may hurt the stage after it. And then something we sometimes see in the end, what we call the climax community, right? The end game, the last stage. There's no more change. That is official science definition, but a lot of times scientists don't necessarily agree in a climax community. They say that no community stops changing, right? As soon as one of these dies, they might open up a little bit of light spot for some of these guys to come back in. So a community is really always changing. So you could say, yeah, there's a climax community, but it doesn't mean it's not changing at all. There's pretty much always going to be some kind of change going on. Here we see an example of succession in motion, quite literally. We have a satellite photograph of the Galapagos Islands, and you can probably look at it and tell which of these guys is the oldest island. Or do you think it's the one here that's circled in red as being the oldest, or do you think it's one of the other islands? Well, hopefully you didn't think it was this island, right? This island is very, very young. You can tell it's very young because there's no vegetation on it. This guy has a little bit more vegetation, a little bit more. These guys way over here are totally covered. So you can see succession has been going on for a lot longer. They have a more established community. And the reason for this is we actually have a hot spot. So right below this island, you've got some volcanic activity going. And because of plate tectonics, this guy used to be over here a long time ago, and the continents are moving, moving this way, and so new islands are always forming. So this is the oldest, middle, a little bit old, a little bit younger, and these are the youngest. So you can see that in action. More examples of disturbances. So after a volcanic eruption, so clearly this could be considered a primary succession because a volcano is going to wipe out pretty much all life, but it doesn't take long for new stuff to show up. This is an example, that's the lichen, so this might be some of the first things to show up on rocks. Forest fires actually are really, really important for succession. A lot of communities rely on them, and this is a very, very famous one in Yellowstone National Park. In 1988, it was a very, very big fire, burned a large percentage of the park. Then, with only just a couple months, already grasses are starting to show up. I mean, these guys, they have seeds in the ground, and they're ready and just waiting for their opportunity to show up and grow. And all those trees are out of the way, these guys can take over. Right? They sort of have dibs. Same thing with lodgepole pines. These guys are actually pretty good at growing after fire. They rely on fire because their pine cones open up under heat. So when there's a high heat situation, that will cause those pine cones to open up, and then that drops down lots of seeds, obviously, and these guys also have, maybe not first dibs, but pretty early dibs on an area after a forest fire. All these guys are now dead. Lots of light can come down for these guys. More wildfires, where there used to be just forest before. Again, you wouldn't see this normally, but now these guys are growing up because these guys are all dead up here. Fireweed even requires fire to germinate, so these guys thrive in forest fire situations. I mean, that's why you sometimes hear people talk about forest fires being healthy and how humans doing too much to limit the risk of forest fires are actually hurting an ecosystem. Okay, finally, this brings us to biodiversity. So bio meaning life, diversity means difference. So there's the difference in life, or the abundance of species in an area, many different numbers of species. All right, and this offers stability. Right? Stability is your ability to resist change or a disturbance. So if you have more biodiversity, it means you have more stability. Right? Think about if you had a food web that only had 5 organisms in it versus a food web that had 50 organisms. Which one's going to be more stable? Right? The one with more biodiversity. Kind of like, would you rather lay in a hammock with 50 ropes or a hammock with 5 ropes? Which one's going to be more stable for you? Because remember, everything's interconnected. You change or you remove one species, that's going to affect lots of other different species. So one thing disappears, that might be a food source or something else. If it's a very diverse ecosystem, there's other food things that it can move on to. If there's not, the loss of one species might be affecting another species. So what are some of the threats to biodiversity? What are some of the things that are limiting to biodiversity? Well, as you might have guessed, a lot of it is going to be due to us. First one, human population expansion. As our populations get larger and larger, we're chopping down forests, or other ecosystems really for that matter, and replacing them with parking lots and housing structures and yada yada yada. So as we reduce the wild areas, we're taking away habitat and removing places for animals to live, and some they have to move on, or they go locally extinct, or whatever. In any case, that's going to reduce biodiversity, so not necessarily very good. Resource exploitation, kind of similar to that first one, but for example, if we decide we're going to mine in an area, looking for gold, let's say, right? We're going to pretty much destroy the habitat in that area. If we decide that this tree is really good for making furniture out of, and we chop down a lot of them, right? That's going to, or exploiting that resource, we're taking over those trees. That's going to reduce habitat again and reduce biodiversity. Another thing that really affects biodiversity is an invasive species. An invasive species is an animal that comes into an ecosystem that doesn't belong there. It's usually like a foreign organism. It's not part of that ecosystem. Okay, so it's non-native, but in addition, it outcompetes. Right, it's better than everything else. So maybe it lays a lot of eggs, or maybe it's a really, really good predator, or maybe it's really good at hiding, or whatever. But for whatever reason, this guy just takes over and creates a monoculture. So there's only one plant in an area, or maybe only one animal, or very few animals, and obviously that's bad for biodiversity. Think about right now as you're driving along the road, if you look out to the side, and anytime you see a yellow bush, that's a plant called Scotch broom. That guy is an invasive species, and you can see, especially as the summer moves on, that guy is taking over. Or if you think of nutria or Himalayan blackberry, or English ivy. All these things are non-native species. They're all invasive species that are taking over and pushing out animals that or plants that you might actually want in an area. Because again, remember, everything being interconnected, you take away one food source, and that's going to affect other things. And with that, we are done with video notes for this school year.